Okay, and straight back into it with part 2. We're getting ready for the paint, so we're going to be using XF60, but I wanted to make the point here that Tamiya have released a new colour, which is XF88. We'll come back to that later. We're going to be using XF60. You can use either. I'm just saying that it's more likely that you're going to have the XF60 as opposed to the 88, but it is available online. And it's quite a nice colour for the Dunkel Gelb, which is what we're spraying here. So to do the wheels, we're going a little bit of a different route as to what we did on the Panzer II. And I'm using a wheel mask here. Now, don't worry about what type of wheel mask this is. This is an old one that was designed for models. It's by Royal Model. It's an etched metal one. But you can use any circle template, and there's usually something that's close enough for most wheels. So what I've done here is sprayed the wheel first with tyre black or rubber black. So that's XF85 in the Tamiya range. And made sure I've got all of the tyre areas and down in the centre of the join between the two wheels. And then we just place that into the circle that fits and spray the Dunkel Gelb, which is XF60, and you should be left with a nice, clean, rubber-rimmed tyre. And then you just go on through and finish those off. So now I'm actually spraying up the side skirts as well, the Schwarzen as it's known, and just got a cocktail stick in the back of that to make sure I can hold it easier, and spraying all around, obviously being aware that where the cocktail stick is going to be a bare piece of plastic. I think what I did was spray all of these and then come back and change the cocktail stick around and spray it again. So just starting now on the superstructure, bit of sped up video, just trying to get into the nooks and crannies. Very light with the spray. Again, the mix of paint to thinner is probably between 60-70 thinner to paint. Something like that, 60-70%. You just, like I said, there's no point talking about what it actually is because it's going to be different for everyone. You just want to get a nice flow through the airbrush. You don't want it sort of spitting, but you also don't want it to be a bit of a grind as well. Sometimes it feels like the paint's trying to pull through a little bit and it all feels a bit sort of heavy and hard to do. You want it to flow nicely, with ease, and be no effort really. So just test fitting now the bracket on the side here for the spare wheels, and you can see the painted up wheels and how effective that is. I've also actually put the wheels on here. That was for the ease of painting, so the sprocket and the idler going on was all just to make it easy. And now we're ready for a gloss coat, so we're using X22 Clear from Tamiya. Much like the Panzer II, so skipping over a couple of things where we've done the same already in the Panzer II. But as you can see here, getting the wheels on, they're all movable. It just makes it so much easier for painting now. They were painted separately, and now we're going to gloss them. We put the whole thing together and gloss it as one. And again, the same thing, nice and well mixed. So again, probably 60% thinner, maybe just a little bit of a heavier mix than what we would with the paint. But again, same principles, it wants to flow nicely, and you don't want to be too heavy, you don't want to stay in one place, you want to move around, always be moving. Don't try and do it all in one go, maybe do 3 or 4 passes to build up the one coat, as it were. Just lightly misting and moving around, but don't move around too much. And if you are going to, put the cap on the cup, because it's happened to me more than once where I'm swinging it around like this and a great big dollop of it swings out the cup and lands on the model. So if in doubt, put the colour cup cap on, because it does happen. So these are the spare wheels. So these aren't the wheels that are already on the chassis that I've done that I mentioned. That was us spraying these spare wheels, and now it's on to the decals. So I've already cut around the carrier film like we did on the Panzer II, as you can see there on the crosses, just nice and tight to the actual decal. We want to cut around the image that we want, and we don't want the hazy carrier film around it. So we're just cutting that off, nice and easy, and this saves a lot of hassle when it comes to the idea of silvering and that sort of thing. This eliminates a lot of it. And then using good principles gets us the rest of the way. I'll leave you with this now because you're going to see how I cut around the numbers, and it's very self-explanatory, so we'll drop back in once we're through that. So once you've got all of your decals ready and they're all cut through, it's time to think about putting them on. So we've just got this one dipped in water. What I've actually done is given it a dip first to loosen that carrier film that we cut off, and then put it back in the water to let that float away from the actual decal. So what we're using now is Microset and Sol. So these are some setting solutions. They're very easy to get hold of, and they've been used for decades in the modelling hobby. So it's best to start with them before we move on to anything else. So you've got Microset, which is the blue one, and Microsol, which is the red one. The blue one is used as a setting solution, so you want to put that onto the actual model before you apply the decal, and then put the decal onto that and smooth it all in like we're doing here. So once you've got it in place, just go over with a wet cotton bud to push out any excess water, and Microset. You use a mix of the two, the water and the set, that is. And once that's, what that will do is react with the glue, and it will give it a better bond to the surface. Then when you're happy with that, and if you've got any raised detail, you only need to do this if you've got raised or recessed detail that you want the decal to set into, you can then go over and use the red one, which is Microsol, which will melt the decal. It's like, it's a bit like a thinner, it's a bit like Tamiya thinner. It's that sort of thing, but it is not. If you think of it in the way we use the thinner on the first Panzer II, to let that sink into the details, it's a similar thing, but it's in a bottle, and you buy it purposely for decals, and it will attack the decal, soften it, and melt it into the recessed or raised detail. So it's useful for those scenarios. I think all of this is on flat panels, so I didn't actually use any Microsol. I just used the set underneath it. It is, yeah, it's all on flat panels, so you wouldn't really need it here, but going forward there might be some scenarios where it's needed, which is very useful. And then again here is decal placement. So we've got the crosses on to kind of work out where we are, and that gives us an idea of the placement for the rest of the parts. So just getting ready to add the numbers now. We've got tactical numbers that are going to go on the higher piece of this Schwarzen here, the side armour. And the idea here is to get all the numbers on, because we've cut around them. They're not delicate, but sometimes you'd get this, say, in a different model, you'd get these numbers in a block of carrier film, so you can place it into where you want it very easily. Where we've cut that away, even though these were single, it does make it a little bit more difficult for placement. So I like to get them all on there, make the whole thing very wet, so everything's movable. Keep it like that. Get the numbers on, so I think we're going for 112, and then we can position it all in afterwards. So you can be quite rough with these Tamiya decals, they're pretty thick, but just make sure there's always liquid underneath, like I've just done there, and then they'll move. If you lose that liquid, they'll start to stick, and friction will come into play, and it will make it very difficult. And all you have to do simply is just get some water underneath it and around the area you want to move it, and then you can maneuver it again easily. And when you're happy with the placement, you can wick a bit of the water off using a cotton bud or a dry brush, something like that will soak the water away, and then you can press it down and let it dry. So as you can see, it looks a bit silly at the minute, but using the methods I've just explained, you can now maneuver everything into where you want it. I must say this is more on the this is a bit past basic decaling. However, these decals are single anyway, so you're going to have to deal with this one way or another, even if you don't cut around the carrier film. So it's a good thing to learn. But if you're worried about decals, or you're using the wrong tools, you want to use metal tools that it's not going to stick to, and don't worry about ripping the decal. It's not going to happen that easily. If you start trying to use your finger or a dry cotton bud or stuff, you can then pull up the decal. So you want to make sure everything you're using is always got a good layer of water on it, and that will keep everything movable, and it will stop any disasters happening. So there you can see I'm happy with the placement, so I'm just going over with a dry brush now and wicking away the water. You can also use a cotton bud as well. Now you are going to move them, but don't worry about that, because once you've got this water out of the way, you can then move it back and it will stay there. it shouldn't move quite as much as it did. And then as you go forward and the more it dries, the better it will stay where it is, and then you can actually seal it all in. There you can see a cotton bud has just got all of that water away. And now final placement, you can see they're already a little bit tougher to move. That's good, that's what we want at this situation now. And we just want to make sure the numbers are upright and straight and everything's in line where we want it. And then we're happy with that. I'm actually using some micro sole here now. This is the red one. Not that there's any detail to melt that into. I just felt with all the manoeuvring that I'd done, I just wanted to get them to melt into the surface a little bit more. So this is what that's quite good for. Now, as that's softening the decal, you want to make sure that you're not really messing about with them too much. I notice here that the middle one is not quite in the right position, so I manoeuvre that, and then when you're happy, you just leave it with this stuff because it's melting the decal. Wet paint, sorry, on a surface. You don't want to mess about with it until it dries. So what we got now is the tracks. We've got to put those on. So these are quite tough in the sense of you really have to stretch them. So make sure you got the direction correctly and refer to the box art, but they kind of go in at one end. You've got sort of triangles at each end, if that makes sense, and they're pointing upwards. So it's always cutting into the track. Each track cuts into itself as the next one comes on, and that goes up. Very hard to explain. I apologise. But you'll see what I mean if you look at the tracks. They go one way or the other, and you want to have them going back in. So once you've got them melted together and we're happy with that, we really just need to push the sprocket in, and using it around the idler to hold it, we need to get the sprocket into that peg. Now, as typical, the other side went in no problem, but this is a bit of a struggle, and I'll explain why. And I wanted to film it so you knew that what is happening is I'm just slightly off the pin. So where I'm trying to push it onto the peg, the sprocket this is, it's just not quite there, and it's pushing against it as opposed to it going in and mating. So all I got to do is get the sprocket and kind of off, pull the track, the elastic of the track forward towards the front of the tank, and then that gives me a bit more space to get that sprocket back on again. It is very, very tight, and it feels as though it's too tight, but it's not. It's done for a reason, and you'll see once it's on that it gives you the right, the track set correctly. It looks good, and these were motorized kits, so they were done and had to be very tight. So that was the reasoning behind it. There you can go. We've finally won the battle there. So we got it in, and it's how we want to be. So we just check that it's all running along the road wheels, and then you can position it so that you have the join on the upper run, where we're going to cover that with the side skirts. And there we go. That gets us to where we want to be, and I'm just showing you there with the side skirt where you can cover it and you don't have to worry about the track sag. And you also want to make sure that where we've got a couple of gaps where we cut them, that the join of the tracks is hidden between those. So everything's looking the part there. We've got the tools on. We've started to paint those now as well and pick those out. So what I've used there is rubber black for the metal parts instead of silver. You don't want to use silver, so we've got rubber black again, XF85, and then I've picked out the tool handles. I've actually left them. I've left them in the desert yellow base colour. That's right. We've also picked out the muffler there as well, and that's painted in XF9 whole red, which is a good colour, but any kind of dark brown is no problem. I'm just checking there the placement for the tow cable, which has been sprayed up as XF85 again. All of the metal for me, the base part, including these tracks, is always XF85. Gives a nice good base. You can see the decal placement there on the side looking pretty good, and the join of the tracks there you can see is now on the top run. That's where we want to keep that. There was a bit of a kink in mine on one side. It was kind of not quite moulded correctly, but it went together in the end. It was okay, and it's not showing any problems at this point. Be a bit more worried if it was an exposed running gear, And now it is time for the matte coat. So we're going to use Flat Clear XF86 from the Tamiya range. Now something a little bit different here. You can carry on with your X20A thinners, no problem. But what I'm actually going to introduce here now is some lacquer thinners. Now you only want to use this stuff if you've got a spray booth and a respirator. It's very smelly and it's quite bad for you. Well, it's very bad for you if you haven't got ventilation. This all is really, but I mean, you know, each to their own. So X20A is fine to carry on, but I'm going to use the Mr. Leveling thinner now because it cuts through with the paint and gives you a much nicer finish. It gives time for it to slow down and set nicely. So we've got our brushes ready for the oils, and we've got a low odor thinner, so that's Daler and Rowney, dried up stuff, no problem there. And now it's time to start using some oils for the weathering. So we've got raw umber here, which we're going to put on the kitchen towel again, just a little bit, and pull from there, because the kitchen towel will wick off the linseed oil, which is one of the parts of oils that takes a longer time to dry. So this should speed up the drying time. We've also got burnt sienna that we're going to do the same thing to. And then the next colour, I'm going to add in a green, which I'm not sure I use, but I always like to have it there on the palette. This is olive green. It's quite good for mixing colours, and you can change the tone of some of the browns. We've also got titanium white there, and then we've got ivory black. And lastly, Payne's grey. So these are the colours that we're using, and they're very useful, and I've just got them laid out there on the kitchen roll, and that's where we're going to pull from into our palette, which here is just a plastic lid. So using a straw, this was a tip that was given to me by my friend, and can't give him a shout out because he has no internet presence. But what we use here is a straw as a pipette. So who knew? Simple things, and simply you just pop it in, put your finger over the top, and there you go. You've got enough to soak up, and there it is. So you're now no need to buy pipettes. Who knew? Simple things, isn't it? It really is. And I happen to have a pack of 1,000 straws, so I'm pretty good for a while now. So once you've got your thinners into your palette where you need to use them, it's time to start thinking about what we're going to use first. And my approach here is to head for the raw umber, and we're going to do basically well, you can call it whatever you like, a pin wash, a panel line wash, whatever it is. This is what we're doing. It really is, I would call this more of a panel line wash, but in armour it's called a pin wash. There are slight differences to aircraft and armour washes in this scenario, but for argument's sake, we'll call it a pin wash, and it's really just picking out the details. So we're not giving it like a sludge wash. We're trying to keep it in that line where we want it and be very subtle and go over the whole model, hitting all of the recessed detail just to kind of bring it out. And it is quite stark, but there's no need to worry about that at the minute. That's just the contrast between the two colours, where the dark yellow is really popping with the raw umber. It's almost a bit too strong, but it all comes together in the end. You could, if you feel like you're worried about it, I mean, you could lighten it up using some of the white or some of the Payne's grey and just slightly shift the tone a little bit. But I think this is fine for what we want to do here. Now, as well as hitting the recessed areas, you can also actually go for some of the raised areas. So where we've got some weld seams, they're recessed and raised. So just running down there will pick out some of the deeper parts of those welds, but it'll also grab the high points as well, and it'll just make the weld stand out a little bit more. We're not leaving it like this. It's all getting wiped off. It's what we're left with after it's wiped off. And once you're happy with your placement and you've got all of your pin wash in, just going in with a slightly thicker brush, loaded with thinners, no paint, we can now just go and wick off any of that excess where it's gone out of the line where we want it. And this is a very simple technique, and this is why oils are so good, because you can always reactivate them. So just going up in there with the thinners and just pushing it back into the lines where we want it. Very simple, taking our time nice and slowly, not trying to rush it at all, and just working on a section at a time, and go around the whole model like that, and you'll find that it'll automatically just clean it up, and it'll start to look very sharp then, and really quite nice. And then you know that you're moving in the right direction then, and it's just basically the weathering. We just keep adding and adding until we're happy with where we want it to be, but trying not to go too heavy at any point. So this pin wash, where it's gone over some of the areas, it is still just a very light pin wash and weathering technique. It's not meant to be making it look really dirty or heavy, it's just meant to be giving it some definition. And here, just on these access panels, you can see the effect there, where we've got a couple of areas where you can see is where I've actually pressed the oil into the recess. It's left a kind of puddle. We're just wiping those away now, and it instantly raises the effect of the weathering process and brings it to life, makes it look right, exactly how we want it, and gives a bit of a patina, you know, a kind of dirty feel to the areas outside. That's giving it a filter. That's because we're not completely wiping it away because it's over a matte coat, and it's kind of giving a filter to the Dunkelgelb, so it will change areas of it a little bit, which is no bad thing. If you want to keep it perfect, then you just do this over a gloss coat, and it should just then only stay in the panel lines. But where it's a matte coat, it's a little bit more friction to it, and it will bite a little bit more. And I always prefer that because it starts to build up the look and feel of a well-used vehicle. So now just having a closer look at how the panel line or pin wash now looks. And you can see it's really given us some definition all over the model now. Makes all of the different panels stand out, and everything's looking pretty good, to be honest. Reasonably happy with it, and you can see how sharp it makes these side panels look with the tools under there, and it's just raised the look of it a little bit. And I've just noticed there on some of the tread plate, it's sort of it puddled a little bit in there, so something to keep an eye out for. And just in the back there as well, some of the darker recesses it's difficult to get through to. But that's fine, that's where it would naturally pull. So, you know, when you've got rain and puddling and mud and rubbish and all of that running into areas, it is going to do that, so it's not a problem. And we're just moving into the final stage now. So what I'm doing here, for this video, that is, for what I'm doing here is just popping some white onto some of the flat areas. And this is the titanium white. This is to give a kind of bleached look. So the Stug is very useful in the fact of, for this it is, for the fact that it's got lots of flat panels or flat sections, and they work very well for this bleaching effect. So this is where we just put a few dots of white paint on one section. This is with thinner, so you pop the thinner, then put the dots of white paint in, and trust me, a little goes a long way. And then we just blend it in. So using a wide brush, we blend that together, and it will give you a faded look. And when that's taken with the rest of the model, you'll start to notice that some panels will look a bit more faded than others, and they want to be the flat panels that are facing the sun. So there you can see a bit more of the white paint with the thinner gone on. And just with a flat brush, just wipe it in. And you don't want, you want to keep wiping until it kind of disappears, and it creates like a white film. Again, it's a filter because you're looking through this film of white paint through into the yellow paint below it. So you just keep wiping like this. It's super speed. Obviously, it's just sped up a little bit. And once it's all blended in, it will start to give that look. And you can see there now on that upper deck, it's all a bit more faded compared to the rest of it. And that's what you want. It would be the upper deck that would be most faded through scuffs through walking on, lots of messing about on the top there, loading in ammo, taking ammo out. And there on the rear deck as well, another large flat area, which is quite useful for this technique as well. So this would be called, well, it's kind of like a dot filter, but we're just using the white, so it's not mixed colours. But it's not worth getting too mixed up in the terminology at the minute. Let's just concentrate on what we're doing, and here we're trying to give a faded look, and this is a technique we're using. So that brings this video to an end. We'll finish off this model in part 3, and we'll kick that straight off with the weathering of the tracks, so that's coming next week. So as always, thanks for staying tuned. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to help the channel out, there are some links below where you can follow us through. There's Patreon, there's website. If you want to follow along with these videos, this is a series. We are going all the way through this. So there is a playlist there that you can save, and that will keep getting updated with all of these videos. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.